again, growing up, had my friends, I had, the family in the church and everything, and I didn't really think much of it. I mean, I was a little kid at the time.
Mhm.
And things started progressing. Um, by the time I was about 12 years old, this was 2013, um, some situations had come up, and there was a failure that had occurred, like, I don't know, just during that time. So we had to be removed from the church. My thought process, I couldn't think. I was so confused, so much overwhelming me. Yeah, I was kind of lost in it.
Welcome back to the Light It Up podcast, everybody. I am your host, Wyatt Taylor. With us today, we have Rafael Alvarez.
What's up, y'all?
And our guest today, Moises Almaraz.
What up?
Rafael, correct me if I'm wrong. It's Moises Almaraz, right?
No, it's Moises. Bro, come on.
There you go.
Not that difficult.
There you
Get
go.
on my nose, bro.
Just do it on purpose, bro. Sorry for my white pronunciation, but today we have our guest, Moises, and funny story how I met him, actually. I knew him before I actually met him. we met on the Bible app, and then we proceeded to meet, January conference, so close to it, but maybe like 7 months, or no, 8 months maybe. Moses has been an awesome friend over the Bible app and per phone number after conference, and we've grown connected, and today we wanted to talk about church kids. This is for you. We wanted to talk about not taking church for granted, and this one will hit home for a lot of church kids. We're going to be getting into the details. He had an issue, him and his family. They had to be separated from the church for a few years, actually. And actually, in one of the most critical points in his life, from when he was 12 to when he was 16. So we're going to delve into that and some of the things he experienced that can bring some clarity to church kids out there about what the real world is like. Although you may have a sense of what it's like, you kind of don't. The way other churches are, etc. We'll be going into that because honestly, what?
Even if you're not a church kid, still watch.
Yeah, even if you're not a church kid, there's definitely relevant stuff.
It's definitely not the fact of that position. Oh, he's a church kid, he's not, or she's a church kid, not. It's because a lot of people who are not church kids can fall into that same routine of the church kid.
Right.
Because I know I have personally, so.
Yeah. So don't leave. I'm not saying that, but I am saying for all of those in church who've grown up in church, this will hit home for you, because I know personally as a church kid, I know that it's PK. Very easy to take the things of God for granted, and even without realizing. So we're going to get into that. Moises is going to walk through his testimony, and we'll ask him questions along the way to give details on how he experienced things and how he dealt with them, so to better help you deal with those things. So Moises, why don't you get started and take it away?
All right. Let me see. Go over some of my notes here. I'll go ahead and start off just with the beginning. So yeah, I was born and raised in the church. My family got saved a year prior to my birth. So before that, even actually, if I can go into a little bit of their testimony, they were going through a few things. They weren't saved and all that, and they had actually separated during that time. My mom was over in Missouri. My dad was still living here in San Diego. My dad, part of a gang, was a druggie, and during that time even dealt with a little bit of alcohol. Before he got saved, he started messing around with meth and everything, and so that really turned him to a downfall. But my mother had gotten saved a little bit prior to that under the leadership of Pastor Rick Buckles. He had met my father a couple times, but after through some things with my parents, my mom decided to leave, go to Missouri with her family. And even while she was over there, she kind of backslid a little bit in a way. My dad eventually said, you know what, I'm done with this life. He gave a call to Pastor Rick Buckles since he knew him and everything. And one thing led to another. My dad ended up going to church. He got saved. And it took a little while of convincing because of my dad's past. My mom didn't believe that he was even saved. So um,
Wow.
eventually he came. He was able to go over there. She said, okay, I'll go home with you. He went over there, picked her up from Missouri, spent a little bit of time there. They drove back here to San Diego, and um, they continued in the church ever since then. I was born about a year later, and this is where everything
Wow.
begins for me at that
So
point.
so even before you were born, there was an incredible redemption story
Oh yeah,
through the church and um, through God. That's
yeah,
awesome. Continue. Sorry.
yeah. No worries. Um, yeah, so like I said, born and raised in church here in San Diego under leadership of Pastor Rick Buckles. Um, for a few years, just growing up, regular church kid, running around, being a loud and obnoxious kid, as I
Priest
was.
tag.
Right, exactly. Just the normal
It's a
things you did
classic.
in church.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But growing up, I watched my dad. He went from being someone who was out in the streets to getting into the church. And um, from my first memory, my dad was already a part of, ministry. Uh, through time, Pastor Buckles had gotten sent out to go to Turkey, and Pastor Scott Lamb actually took over for about 11 months. Um,
Really? Oh
yeah,
wow, I did not know that.
yeah. So he took over the San Diego church for a little while there was a transition because Pastor Joe Rice was coming to take it over, but he had a few things to work on while he was still in South Africa at the time,
Okay.
passing over his ministry over. So after 11 months, Pastor Rice came in, Pastor Scott Lamb went out. I believe that's when he went to Vegas after that.
Probably.
Yeah, so, and then once Pastor Rice came in, my dad at first didn't like it because he was used to Pastor Buckles. He looked up to him like a father.
Right.
And so it was hard for him, hard for a lot of people in the church. Eventually, he gave into it and said, you know what, I'm going to support my pastor no matter what. And he got into ministry. He started helping out in children's church just as a worker. And then um, eventually he actually took over the children's church. So he became the children's church leader.
Oh,
Um,
that's awesome.
yeah, so I was not a pastor's kid, but I was a leader's kid at least during my
Right.
time. And
Kind of the
so,
same
yeah,
aspect.
so
That's great.
everyone knew me as, oh, that's Raul's kid. Always, just like probably for you that everyone knows you as just like, oh yeah, that's
Right.
Pastor Taylor's son.
Right. Yeah.
So
Becomes less of a name game.
yeah, so it kind of put me, like in the shadow of like, oh, these are my parents. Like, so I was pretty much under their shadow for a while. So during that time, grew up a little bit more. Our church started bouncing around to building by building. Eventually, we got to the building that we are currently at. By the time I was 9 years old, I believe. And at that time, my father, he was the children's church leader. He was also the one that did all the announcements and everything for the church. He was in the jail ministry, so he went to the jails and preached there as well.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah, so it was some crazy stuff going on. But as of recent time, due to COVID, they haven't been able to go back for
Yeah.
right now. So that sucks.
Yeah.
He also actually, my dad, had a play as well for about him and my mother. Just about the life story
Oh
of,
wow.
yeah, before they got
Yeah.
saved. It was called Dead and Gone. So
Oh,
it's actually online, filmed over at Las Vegas at Scott Lamb's church.
I'm gonna have to watch that. It sounds
Yeah,
like an awesome play.
yeah. So remember Dead and Gone, Raul Almaraz testimony, basically.
Okay. Sounds good.
Um, but yeah, so from there, just again growing up, had my friends, I had the family in the church and everything, and I didn't really think much of it. I mean, I was a little kid at the time,
Mhm.
and things started progressing. Um, by the time I was about 12 years old, this was 2013. Um, some situations had come up, and there was a failure that had occurred, like I don't know, just during that time. So we had to be removed from the church for a time being.
And how old were you?
I was 12 at that point.
Yeah, so a very critical time in your life, I'd say.
Yeah, I had literally just turned 12 like a month prior to everything.
Wow.
So this is where everything comes down to the start of that.
Yeah. And how was it? How was it leaving the church? I mean, did you have a sense of what was going on or
At
what
the,
had happened?
at the beginning, I mean, I knew of those kind of things. I just never imagined that happening to us. And I didn't understand
Right.
why or whatever. And I didn't understand until, a while later.
When you're older, right?
Yeah.
And so, what was kind of your thought process in leaving the church? Did you guys go to another church?
Yeah, so for a minute we were going to another fellowship church, but then it came to be that we would have to actually be completely out of the fellowship entirely,
Oh wow.
which sucked. I was confused. I was kind of scared. I was like, what is going on?
Yeah.
Um,
And so why don't you? What was kind of your thought process? I mean, you're 12 years old and you're leaving the place you grew up in, your second home. How was
yeah,
that mentally?
mentally, I was distraught during that time. Like, honestly, it was just completely, I was confused. I was scared. I was unsure
Right.
of what the future was going to hold. I was unsure of what was going on at the time. I mean, I'm a little kid still at this point, but
Right.
this is like like you said, the most critical point of my time of my life,
Definitely.
going through
Yeah.
growing up, becoming a teenager. And so my thought process, I couldn't think. I was so confused, so much
Wow.
overwhelming me. Yeah, I was kind of lost in it. And so it took a while for me to gain a full grasp of everything going on, you know.
Right.
Um, and during that time, we started going to other churches, not even of the fellowship, just entirely. And it was different. It was not home. For one, it didn't have what home had, you know. Um, like one of I can say example of some of the things they didn't have, like some of our pastors would mention, and it's very true, is only Sunday service. And sometimes it was only the morning. That was it. There was no Wednesday, there was no Sunday night,
Yeah.
nothing. It was just
Yeah. And sorry to cut you off,
no
but
worries.
it's very interesting. For the Potter's House kids out there, you'd be surprised how differently church run things. Even going to the extremes of the ones who are getting politically involved and stuff, and
Hmm.
even have wrong convictions and doctrines, which can get very scary. Being in a church that believes in something that is biblically false, that can get very scary, because then not only are you, I mean, you can't serve God in a wrong way, but believing in things that aren't true in the Bible and aren't biblically sound can lead to very dangerous things in your spiritual life.
Yeah.
Which is a completely different subject. I mean, we're not going to
Yeah.
get into that. But uh, Potter's House kids, if you listen to Memorial Stones, you can understand that even the fellowship that our church came from was somewhat very different from the way we run things. Their conferences, the way they sent out churches. Some churches don't even send out missionaries, and it's such
Hmm.
a yeah, like get married and then sent out, door director, all that seems so simple to us when we've done it our whole lives, been a part of that our whole lives. But it's kind of scary because, especially in your situation, when you kind of transition from Potter's House to a separate church,
Yeah.
there are a lot of churches that do not do the same things that we do. We definitely take the anointing and God's grace and the differences in our fellowship for granted, mainly because we don't have experience in other churches. But the more I've heard about other churches, you know, bad churches, if that's even a thing,
Hmm.
the more I've heard about it over the years, especially over the years, the more grateful I become for being a part of the Potter's House Christian Fellowship Ministries.
Yeah.
But anyway, continue where you were going. That's just a little message to my Potter's House kids.
Yeah. No, exactly. Some of the things I can give, for example, like that of, they only had services Sunday
Yeah,
morning.
right.
Um, they didn't have altar call. They didn't have speaking in
Wow.
tongues. Some of them did even have like, oh, we're gonna give for world evangelism, whatever.
Yeah.
Like they're just like, oh, there's a donation for this thing if you want. Some places did even do like offering, like we do. Is like
Yeah.
even like my pastor will say there'll be like those churches that will have a little thing in the back to be like, yeah, if you guys want to give, you can just put it back here.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it was completely different.
And how
And
did you? Oh, sorry. How did you adjust to that, or how did you feel in that kind of switch?
that
Would
was,
you kind of feel weird?
yeah, very weird
I
because
bet.
it
Yeah.
took a while. We were traveling around. My dad actually just went and looked at other churches and everything. And sometimes there was times where we were home. We didn't have live stream back at that point,
Right.
so we were just at home and we were like, what do we do? And so sometimes we would like read our Bibles there, maybe do like a short little Bible study together. But it wasn't the same as being in our fellowship, being at my mother church.
Right.
And so by the time we did find a church that, yeah,
Yeah.
Did you have any kind of will to go back to your mother church, or was it like I'm just in the long run and I just miss hanging out with my friends back in the day or at the other church?
at uh at that point, I really missed my friends. I
Right.
wasn't around them as much as I used to be, and we would sometimes, my mother and I would actually go, and we were allowed to visit every so often. It was just my dad; he wasn't able to. Um, so I did visit every so often, and it helped a little at the time, but then when we were gone from there, it hurt more
Yeah.
because it was not just my friends; that was my full family because they were over at the house a lot. I can even say back in the time, my dad was actually, forgot to mention that he was also the youth leader for a little while,
Oh
unofficially.
wow.
But he
Yeah.
took in all the teen guys. We used to actually we played the Xbox, like a bunch of us teenagers. So well, them teenagers, I was still a kid, but we would
Yeah.
hook up our TVs and our Xboxes and be like, all right, we're playing it in between service on Sunday. We'll be all at my parents' house. He gets pizza. We all start playing and everything. And so it was weird not having that, having all
Right.
those people over. We were basically alone. And that's how I felt, was alone.
Mm.
Yeah, because I didn't have my friends at the time.
Wow. Yeah. So another question: were you saved prior to this? Prior
I,
to the?
Yeah, I was gonna ask that.
Yeah.
yeah, I mean,
Was it like a church kid salvation, where it's like,
yeah, it was probably more of one of those, just like, yeah, I
yeah.
lifted my hand, cool, I'm gonna go do the prayer, but it wasn't like I didn't mean it that
Right.
much.
Now
Yeah,
I'm gonna go eat these crayons.
yeah. I'm just like, I'm gonna
Yeah.
do it so that they get off my back about doing it, type of deal.
Right. Yeah. Um. So, did you ever come to the realization within these years of true salvation, or was there ever a point where you came to yourself and like, am I actually saved? Did you ever have that kind of moment with God, being away from the church?
I did at several points, but because of everything that was going on, like I said, it was like almost 4 years of time being away from my mother church. Um, we did eventually be able to go back to the fellowship, but I can get to that a little bit later.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, like there was moments, just like I feel like I'm not safe, but at the same time, looking around at everything that was going on, I was like, but do I even want to look at the mess that's going on because of one little thing? Which again, I didn't understand the situation still at that point, but I questioned it a lot at the time.
Yeah. I bet. Um. I think, especially with it being in those very, very, very crucial developing in any person, uh, the 4 years of 12 to 16 are very crucial in how you're raised and what you do, um, because that kind of shapes your character in ways. So that leads to my next question. How do you think your time away from Father's house, church, kind of in a sense, how do you think that affected your growth and development and maturity as a person?
As a person wise, I felt like because I was alone, I felt a little bit more, they could probably say introverted. And I became even more introverted because I was already behind my parents' shadow. I was everywhere where they were,
Yeah.
and I loved it. But um, when all this happened, I was basically at home pretty much every day, all day, other than going to school. And then later on, I was homeschooled too, so I was at home even more often than usual.
Wow.
Uh, and so I just felt so introverted, so like I wasn't around people, so I wasn't really social. And with everything, I was still hurt at the time with all of it, so I didn't really grow. I feel like in that moment, I didn't feel like I matured or growed the way that I could have. I just I just stayed sheltered in my own little self, and I eventually got caught up in a few things just to get into a satisfaction, a self-satisfaction, at the time, and sneaking around behind my parents' back on that.
Um, Going back to I don't know, you said you're not social and all that.
Hmm.
What do you think caused it to be more social or less social? And because I don't know, because like I don't know how
Yeah,
it
yeah,
feels not to be social, man. Because I'm very
Yeah.
social myself. So what drive it? Because like you said, you used to hang out with the church kids and all that. What was it? The separation from that caused? Oh, we're just gonna leave, or what? Was it the trauma that caused it to be like, less? I'm gonna shut people out.
Yeah. So because of the situation, not many people came around at all.
Mhm.
Maybe they would call up my parents and all that, but no one really came around the house. I didn't really get around my friends as much. It took a while before, you know, people were able to be like, hey, you know what, that's in the past, all that stuff. Like, let's all like hang out and stuff. And so being less people around, just me and my family, um, being at school, at home, I didn't have anyone around. So when it came to actually interacting with people, I was too scared to. And I mean, even now, that's still something that I battle. Um,
yeah.
but I have extroverted friends that will pull me to those things now. So
There you
Amen.
go. That's
That's
how you
that's
do
what
it.
helps. Yes.
That's how you
the
do it.
best part.
So
Especially
that's
in
what.
our fellowship.
Oh yeah, no, that helps at conference. I'm just like, oh, I don't know. They're like, come on, bro. I'm like, all right, fine.
Yes, 100%.
Yeah,
Conference is awesome, and that's our plug. Go to conference. Conference
absolutely.
is
Amen.
That's Bible app.
awesome. Yeah, you can meet your friends on the Bible app, and you can have them on the podcast. Months later. So
There you go. Yeah.
that's a plus from conference. um. So let's see. So 4 years. It's a lot of ground to cover, but this reminds me of the quarantine from COVID,
Hmm.
which from what you're saying, it seems like were you back in church before COVID? It,
Yes. Yeah.
okay, so this quarantine kind of reminds me of, or this time away, it reminds me of the 2020 quarantine.
Yeah.
I mean, we all remember it, around March 2020, uh, even February for some, I think. There's a lot of time with your families, which at times could have been very, very annoying. um, but it just reminds me of everybody. I think kind of went through their own battles. I kind of dealt with loneliness for a while, even with family members. It's
Hmm.
like, oh, it's so surprising, but then when you when the only people you hang out with are like the five people you've known your whole life, like it's it can get very lonely
Oh yeah.
sometimes.
Yeah.
Um, and in your situation, what you're saying is things were kind of just stacking on top of each other to the point where it was just loneliness on top of loneliness. Being homeschooled led to more time at home, less time out and about doing things.
Hmm.
And just totally reminds me of the 2020 quarantine. So that's kind of the vibe I'm getting from your story and your
Yeah.
situation. Is just that isolation. It reminds me of a sermon Pastor Greg Mitchell preached at a men's rally last year. Uh, Men in isolation and what happens after that. I don't have the notes on me,
Yeah,
but I
yeah,
do remember it being a powerful sermon on what happens when men isolate themselves from society, the importance of fellowship, And I think as you guys were somewhat trying to find a new church, I think something that also happened is you weren't losing the old connections, but you were struggling to build new ones,
hmm
right?
yeah,
So what happens then is when you don't have fellowship, you don't have communication, and communication is such an important spiritual aspect in anyone's spiritual life and walk. But anyway, I just wanted to ask, you kind of how do you kind of compare this to quarantine to this? Was it kind of the same thing? Do you think?
um, it can be actually at times that does bring a nice reminder on that yeah, quarantine. I guess because of the whole situation, I was already like established for it, so it didn't really bother me in quarantine. I hated being isolated at home so long because I got used to working, being at church all the time. So if I'm at home for more than 2 days, I'm already going crazy. But um, I got used to it because of during that time. Um, I did forget to mention too. So I have a brother. He's 31 years old, but he was born with, or he was diagnosed at about 4, 5 months old with cerebral palsy, which,
Oh wow.
yeah. So that the doctors told my parents that his brain would not develop anymore at that point, basically. So
Hey.
they even gave, this is a testimony right here. They even said that he wasn't going to live past the age of 2, and here he is at 31 years old.
Wow.
So
Praise God.
That's
That
why
is
gay
awesome.
doctors singing liars.
not for reals. Every time we take him, we're like, hey, he's still here.
I
We're
know.
rocking and rolling.
The same doctor. Um,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
I mean, it's been a
Crazy.
change of doctors, but still, yeah,
Yeah. It's insane what these doctors tell us.
absolutely.
Fiends.
Yeah. But
It was awesome.
so
It was
with
awesome.
with that and with my brother at the time during this whole situation, he wasn't as healthy as he is now. So a lot more attention was on him than me, which I mean, I don't blame my parents because he needs all the attention that um, we can give him because having to feed him,
Right.
he doesn't eat using his mouth. We have to use a tube into his stomach, and then he's basically like a baby to where he has to get his diaper changed. So we have to bathe him. Like my parents have to lift him into the tub to actually bathe him and put him back into his bed and everything. So he's on bed rest pretty much 24/7, other than getting into his wheelchair. So a lot more attention was on him, which drove a little less attention on me. So that added to the
That
loneliness as
added
well.
to the loneliness.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay, you guys, thank you for joining us. That is going to do it for today. Make sure you tune in next week for part 2 with Moises. We're going to hear his redemption story. We're going to hear what happens when he came back to the church. And we're going to have a few ending points for our church kids and for those going to church. A few parting thoughts, you could say. But before you go, make sure you subscribe, like, follow on Instagram and Spotify. We have a lot of activity on our Instagram account. Make sure you go check out that. We have merch drops, announcements, things like that, all of that and more on our Instagram, more than our YouTube channel. So make sure you check that out. Make sure you check out our merch. This is one of my favorites. This is a lowercase edition. By the time we're recording this, this came out like literally just yesterday. But I know when we release this, it's going to be a few weeks old. But this is one of my favorite shirts that we've made, just because of the simplicity of this. Is embroidered, very cheap, like $13, especially with the cost of embroidery nowadays. Rafael is copping his merch.
Got around the world.
And fortunately, he just realized why it's around the world, because there's a world on the shirt. We won't talk about that.
Yeah, literally. As soon as we're gonna talk about this. We're gonna put this in bloopers. Anyway, so I was we're about to start the podcast, and I was like looking at my shirt. I was like, wait a minute, what's that white line there? Oh, it's a world. Now I know why it's around. I thought it was just a circle. But no, there's a world in it. Now you get it now, so you guys can go buy it now.
The little details, guys. The little details matter. I'm telling you. And
Not everyone's gonna come buy it now because they noticed there's a world in it now.
yeah, the little details, guys. There's always little details. Anyway, thank you guys for joining us. We'll see you next week. Make sure you tune in to hear the rest of Moises Almaraz's story. See you then. God bless.
Bye, guys.
Adios.
Dude, it
Yeah.
bothers the mess out of me how they say the freaking city's name, dude.
Who?
You! When you
Yeah,
say Los Baños, or whatever the...
I say
how do you
Los
say it?
Banos.
Los
Los
Baños.
Banos.
Come on.
I say
It
Los
bothers the
Banos.
mess out of me, dude. Don't understand. As
I
a
might have-
Mexican, that kills me.
And
See, I
you
can do
know,
the pronunciations right, at least.
well, you know, I can very well say Los Baños or Moises Alvarez, but I choose not to.
The choice.
All right, let's get started. I do it just to annoy Rafael, solely just to annoy Rafael.
That's fair.
Okay,
Everyone just loves seeing me mad, bro.
for real.
And then they
That's
complain
bad.
that I'm mad.
Like, bro, why you have anger issues, man?
Don't. Shut up, you do.